For 7 hours, she said nothing. Not one word. People around her thought she was quiet and sad. Nobody knew who she really was. Then the plane started breaking apart in the sky. She stood up. She spoke. And the 2 F-22 fighter pilots who heard her voice, froze, because that voice was supposed to be dead. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The flight from Chicago to Los Angeles was supposed to take 4 hours and 12 minutes. Captain Daniel Brooks had flown this exact route 230 times. He knew every weather pattern, every altitude change, every small turbulence pocket over the Rocky Mountains. His first officer, Lieutenant Maya Patel, had been flying with him for 3 years. They worked together the way two experienced people do, quietly, efficiently, without needing to explain things to each other. The aircraft was a Boeing 777. 312 passengers were on board that morning. Gate C-17 had been the usual organized chaos before boarding. Families with strollers. Businessmen on phones. Students with backpacks too large for the overhead bins. Normal Tuesday morning energy at O'Hare International. Flight attendant Grace Kim had been doing her pre-boarding checks when she first noticed the woman in seat 32B. She had boarded early. Not first class early, just quietly early, before the main crowd. She sat down, placed a small black bag under the seat in front of her, and folded her hands in her lap. No phone. No book. No headphones. She simply sat there with her eyes half closed, perfectly still, while the rest of the aircraft filled up around her. Grace had noted it the way flight attendants notice everything, not with alarm, just with awareness. Some passengers were talkers. Some were sleepers. Some were nervous flyers who needed constant reassurance. And some were just completely, utterly self-contained. The woman in 32B appeared to be that last type taken to an extreme level. She was not remarkable in any visible way. Medium height. Dark hair pulled back simply. Plain clothes, dark navy jacket, black jeans, no jewelry. No laptop bag. No business documents. Nothing that suggested who she was or where she was going or why. Her name on the manifest read Sarah Cole. The man in 32A, a real estate developer named Patrick Hess, had tried to start a conversation as the plane pushed back from the gate. He had made a comment about the weather in Los Angeles. Sarah Cole had turned her head slightly toward him, given the smallest possible nod that could still technically be considered acknowledgement, and then returned her gaze forward. Patrick Hess did not try again. The student in 32C, a 22-year-old named Jordan Webb, had asked Sarah if she needed help putting her bag in the overhead compartment. Sarah had already secured her bag under the seat. She shook her head once. Jordan shrugged and put his own bag away. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the woman in 32B had not moved, had not spoken, and had not changed her expression by even a fraction. Grace Kim had passed her 3 times with the drinks trolley. Each time, Sarah had pointed at the water option with one finger. No words. No smile. Just a single quiet gesture and then stillness again. The other flight attendant, a man named David Torres, had developed his own theory. He told Grace quietly in the galley that the woman was probably coming from a funeral. Something in the way she held herself, not tense, but careful. Like someone carrying something heavy inside them. Grace thought that was probably right. Neither of them suspected anything else. What neither Grace nor David nor Patrick nor Jordan could see was what was actually happening behind Sarah Cole's half-closed eyes. She was working. Every few minutes her eyes opened fully for exactly 2 to 3 seconds. In those seconds she processed the entire visible cabin. She noted which passengers had moved since her last scan. She identified the 2 men in row 18 who had exchanged 3 whispered conversations in the past hour, probably nothing, likely just friends, but noted. She registered the subtle change in engine tone that had occurred 14 minutes after takeoff, a very small irregularity in the left engine's pitch cycle that the flight crew almost certainly had not flagged because it was well within acceptable parameters. Almost. She counted the exit rows. She assessed which passengers were physically capable and which would need assistance. She tracked the flight attendants' movement patterns and identified the 40-second window in each cycle when the rear galley was unmonitored. This was not anxiety. This was not paranoia. This was simply how she had been trained to exist in any enclosed space with strangers. Her name was not Sarah Cole. That name was a construction, a carefully built identity supported by documents, a work history, a digital footprint, and years of operational security discipline. The woman behind that name had a different identity entirely, one that existed only in classified files requiring the highest levels of government clearance to access. Her actual call sign, the name she had been known by in the squadrons and the classified programs and the briefing rooms that officially did not exist, was Wraith. She had earned that name across 19 deep penetration missions flown in aircraft that the United States Air Force publicly denied having. She had more confirmed air-to-air kills than any active-duty pilot in the American military. She had developed evasion techniques that were now standard training in 3 Allied air forces. She had flown missions over territory where being identified meant immediate death, in conditions where most other pilots would have turned back, at speeds and altitudes that pushed both the aircraft and the human body to their outermost limits. She was 36 years old. 11 months ago, her official military record had been quietly updated. The cause, killed in action during a classified operation in a region that could not be named in any document. The date, redacted. The circumstances, not available at any clearance level below the President of the United States. She was not dead. She was in seat 32B, drinking water, watching everything, saying nothing. The reason she was on this particular flight on this particular morning was contained in a small black bag under the seat in front of her. Inside that bag were documents relating to a threat assessment she had been quietly building for 4 months while living under her cover identity. She was traveling to meet a contact in Los Angeles, someone with access to information about a pattern of anomalies she had identified in commercial aviation cybersecurity systems. Anomalies that should not exist. Anomalies that suggested someone had been inside systems they had absolutely no right to be inside. She had told no one she was making this trip. She had booked the ticket with a credit card that traced back through 4 layers of corporate identity before connecting to anything real. She had arrived at the airport 2 hours early and spent that time watching. She had seen nothing that concerned her. She had been wrong about that. But she did not know it yet. 2 hours and 40 minutes into the flight, the aircraft shuddered. It was brief. Less than 3 seconds. The kind of thing most passengers registered as mild turbulence and immediately forgot about. Drinks shifted slightly in cups. One person's magazine slid off their tray table. A baby in row 7 startled and then settled. Sarah Cole's eyes opened fully and stayed open. In the cockpit, Captain Brooks looked at his instruments with a small frown. The shudder had registered, a pressure fluctuation in the hydraulic system, brief, now gone. He ran through his checks. Everything was reading normal. He made a note of it and continued. First Officer Patel had caught it too. She ran her own secondary check. Normal. She glanced at Brooks. He gave a small shake of his head. Not a concern. Not yet. 7 minutes later it happened again. This time it lasted longer. 5 seconds. The aircraft moved with a vibration that was distinctly different from turbulence. It came from inside the plane rather than from the air around it. Overhead bins rattled faintly. Several passengers looked up from their screens. In 32B, Sarah had already identified the frequency pattern of the vibration. It was not structural fatigue. It was not turbulence. It was hydraulic. Specifically, it was consistent with intermittent pressure loss in a primary hydraulic line, the kind of failure that could remain manageable for hours or could cascade into something catastrophic within minutes, depending entirely on where the failure was occurring and how fast it was progressing. She did not move yet. She was not a commercial pilot. She had no authority on this aircraft. The flight crew were experienced professionals and they had instruments she could not see from seat 32B. She waited. She watched. In the cockpit, the conversation had become more focused. Brooks was running through the hydraulic system readings carefully now. Pressure in System A was fluctuating, small drops, recovering, dropping again. System B was normal. System C was normal. The fluctuations in A were staying within a range that technically still qualified as operational, but the trend line was not reassuring. Patel pulled up the maintenance history for the aircraft. Nothing in the recent log suggested this specific issue. The plane had passed its last full inspection 14 days ago. Brooks made a decision. He keyed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Brooks. We are experiencing a minor technical irregularity that we are monitoring carefully. As a precaution, we are going to descend to a lower altitude and we may make a brief unscheduled stop in Denver to have our maintenance team take a look. There is no cause for concern. We will keep you updated. Thank you." The cabin responded the way cabins always respond to that kind of announcement, a ripple of low conversation, some nervous looks exchanged between seat neighbors, the sound of people putting down their headphones to pay attention. Patrick Hess in 32A turned to Sarah Cole. "Did he say unscheduled stop?" He was trying to sound casual and not quite succeeding. Sarah nodded once. That's probably nothing, right?" Sarah looked at him. Her expression was calm. Completely calm. The kind of calm that is not performed, the kind that comes from having been in situations where actual catastrophe was a real and immediate possibility and managing to function through them anyway. "The crew are handling it," she said. It was the first full sentence she had spoken since boarding. Patrick stared at her for a moment, not entirely reassured by her words but oddly reassured by something in how she said them, and turned back to face forward. The aircraft continued to descend. And then the second system failed. The warning tone in the cockpit was not loud. It was a steady, measured sound, the aviation equivalent of a calm professional voice telling you that something was now seriously wrong. Hydraulic System A had not recovered. It had dropped below the minimum operational threshold and was continuing to fall. Simultaneously, a fault indicator had appeared in the flight control computer, a software alert that should not have been possible given the redundancies built into the system. Brooks felt it in the controls first. A heaviness. A lag between input and response that told an experienced pilot, without needing to check any instrument, that the aircraft was no longer flying the way it was supposed to fly. "Jen." His voice was controlled. Professional. The voice of someone who has trained for this. "I see it." Patel was already moving through the emergency checklist. "Hydraulic A is gone. Flight control computer is throwing fault codes, multiple. This doesn't match any single emergency profile. Get on the radio. Denver approach, emergency declaration." Patel keyed the radio. "Denver approach, United 777 Heavy, we are declaring an emergency. Multiple system failures, hydraulic loss, flight control anomalies. Requesting immediate vectors and emergency services on standby." The response was immediate and professional. "United 777 Heavy, Denver approach, emergency acknowledged. Turn left heading 260, descend and maintain 10,000, emergency services will be standing by. What is the nature of your emergency?" "Hydraulic System A failure confirmed, flight control computer showing multiple fault codes, we are losing control authority in the primary system." In the cabin, the aircraft lurched. It was not subtle this time. The nose dropped sharply to the left, overcorrected, and the whole aircraft shuddered through a motion that sent loose items flying and caused a section of the overhead bins to burst open. Bags tumbled into the aisle. A child screamed. Then several adults. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with trained efficiency, voices steady, hands guiding people back into their seats. Brace position. Seatbelts fastened. Brace position. Grace Kim was moving up the aisle toward the front when she nearly walked into Sarah Cole, who was already standing. "Ma'am, you need to sit down immediately. I need to speak with your captain." Sarah's voice was not raised. It was not panicked. It was simply direct in a way that Grace Kim had never heard from a passenger before. "I have military aviation experience. There is something happening to this aircraft that goes beyond hydraulic failure. Your pilots need to know what I know." Grace's training told her to refuse. Absolutely no unauthorized access to the cockpit under any circumstances. That was the rule, and it was a good rule, and it existed for excellent reasons. But Grace Kim had been a flight attendant for 11 years, and she had a well-developed instinct for the difference between a passenger who was panicking and a passenger who knew something. The woman standing in front of her in the lurching aisle was not panicking. She was measuring. She was thinking. And there was something in her eyes that Grace could not name but recognized instinctively as genuine competence. What kind of military experience? The kind that means I have been in a failing aircraft before and brought it home. Please. Every second matters. Grace made the call. She would answer for it later if she was wrong. Follow me. Captain Brooks turned when the cockpit door opened. What he saw was a woman of average appearance standing in his doorway with an expression of complete focus. Not panic. Not the wide-eyed look of a passenger who had forced their way up here out of fear. Something else entirely. "Captain. My name is Sarah Cole. I have military flight experience including emergency procedures for catastrophic system failures. I need 30 seconds to tell you something and then you can decide what to do with it." Brooks did not have time for protocol. His aircraft was dying. Talk. Your hydraulic failure and your flight computer fault codes are not two separate problems. They are one problem with two symptoms. Someone has been inside your aircraft's digital systems. The failure pattern you are seeing, simultaneous hydraulic pressure loss and flight computer anomalies, this is consistent with a targeted cyber intrusion designed to look like mechanical failure. Your backup systems are not engaging properly because they have been told not to engage. I can help you access manual overrides that exist outside the compromised system. Brooks stared at her for one full second. Then, show me. Sarah stepped into the cockpit and her hands went to the secondary control panel with the certainty of someone who had studied this exact system, not because she had flown a commercial 777, but because she had spent 4 months analyzing the vulnerabilities in commercial aviation software and she knew where those vulnerabilities were and what they looked like when they were being exploited. Here. Her finger indicated a panel section. Your manual backup override. It bypasses the digital flight control layer entirely. You will be flying on direct mechanical linkage. The aircraft will feel heavier and the response will be slower, but it will be predictable and it will be yours. Patel was watching her with an expression caught between disbelief and desperate hope. How do you know this? I spent 4 months learning exactly this, Sarah said. I was trying to find out who built the attack before they used it. They used it before I got there. The aircraft shuddered again, badly. A warning tone sounded. We are running out of altitude, Brooks said. His voice was absolutely controlled. Can you do this? Give me 45 seconds. She worked in silence. Brooks held the controls with both hands, feeling the aircraft fight him. Patel kept the radio communication going with Denver approach, relaying their status in the calm measured language of professional aviation emergency. Then Sarah said, try it now. Brooks felt it immediately. The heaviness was still there, more than normal, significantly more, but the lag was gone. The aircraft was responding. Slowly, reluctantly, but responding. It's working, Patel said quietly. She's heavy but she's mine, Brooks confirmed. Then, with the controlled relief of someone who has just pulled back from the edge, good. That is very, very good. Sarah straightened up. She looked at the navigation display for 3 seconds, doing calculations that she did not speak aloud. Then, get me the radio. I need to talk to whoever is in the air around us. At Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, the emergency alert had gone out 14 minutes earlier. 2 F-22 Raptors were airborne within 90 seconds of the alert. Call signs Falcon 1 and Falcon 2. Falcon 1 was piloted by Major Tom Garrett, 13 years in the F-22, over 2,800 flight hours, 3 classified combat deployments. Falcon 2 was Captain Rosa Diaz, 8 years, 1,800 hours, one of the most respected young pilots in the southwestern region. They had the Boeing 777 on radar within 4 minutes of takeoff and visual contact 3 minutes after that. What they saw through their canopies confirmed the severity of the emergency. The 777 was flying with the unsteady, overcautious motion of an aircraft on manual override, the pilots compensating constantly, working hard, keeping it in the air through skill and concentration rather than the assistance of automated systems. Smoke was trailing from one engine nacelle. The flight path showed the slight weaving of a plane whose pilots were managing rather than flying. Garrett keyed the emergency frequency. United 777 Heavy, this is Air Force Falcon 1, F-22 Escort, 2 aircraft on your 6. What is your status and what do you need from us? The response that came back made him lean forward in his seat. The voice was professional. Clean. Completely unhurried. Falcon 1, this is the passenger assist. We have manual override established on primary flight controls following confirmed cyber intrusion on the aircraft's digital systems. We are flyable. We need vectors to Denver International, longest available runway, and eyes on our control surfaces. Can you confirm visual on our elevator authority? It was the phrasing. Passenger assist. Civilian language. But the way the words were organized, the structure of the information, the specific request, the assessment delivered before the ask, that was not civilian. That was someone who had spent years communicating in exactly this way. Someone trained in military aviation communication. Garrett pulled the aircraft into a position where he could see the 777's tail surfaces clearly. Passenger assist, Falcon 1, I have visual. Your left elevator is showing partial damage but you have authority. Right elevator looks clean. Your biggest challenge on approach is going to be landing configuration with the hydraulic state. Understood. Falcon 1, can you confirm your operational range and fuel state for extended escort? Again, a civilian would not ask that. A civilian would not know to ask that. Garrett exchanged a glance with the sky around him and then asked the question that had been building since the first transmission. Passenger assist, this is Falcon 1. Can you confirm your aviation background for coordination purposes? There was a pause. Short. 2 seconds at the most. But in the rhythm of radio communication, 2 seconds is a long time. Then the voice came back, calm, steady, and carrying 3 years of operational silence in every syllable. Falcon 1. My designation is Wraith. Major Tom Garrett's hands stopped moving on the controls. Completely. Fully. Stopped. For 4 full seconds, one of the most experienced F-22 pilots in the United States Air Force sat in his cockpit above the Colorado landscape and did absolutely nothing. Did not respond. Did not move. His hands rested on the controls like they had been placed there by someone else. His eyes were fixed on the struggling 777 in the middle distance, but he was not seeing it anymore. He was seeing a memorial. He was hearing a briefing room voice saying the words killed in action. He was remembering a name being spoken in hushed tones in corridors of buildings that did not appear on public maps. In Falcon 2, Captain Rosa Diaz had heard the same transmission. Her reaction was a sharp intake of breath, loud enough to be caught by her own cockpit microphone, and then total silence. Garrett came back on the private channel between the two F-22s. His voice, for the first time since takeoff, was not entirely controlled. "Did she just say Wraith?" "That's what I heard," Diaz said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Wraith is dead. Wraith has been dead for 11 months. I was at the memorial service, Rosa. I stood there. I know. I was standing next to you." A silence stretched between the two aircraft moving at speed through the clear Colorado sky. "That is not a name someone just picks," Garrett said slowly. "That is not a call sign someone makes up or guesses. Nobody outside those programs even knows that name exists. Nobody. Not the press, not other squadrons, not anyone without the specific clearances." "Then she's not dead," Diaz said quietly. 3 words. But the weight of those 3 words moved through both cockpits like cold water poured down the back of the neck. Wraith. The pilot whose classified mission record represented some of the most extraordinary aviation achievement in modern military history. The pilot who had been spoken about in the specific, careful way that military people speak about someone who has done things that cannot be put in writing. The pilot who had disappeared 11 months ago on an operation so classified that its existence could not be confirmed in any document below presidential authorization level. The pilot whose memorial service had been attended by people who cried real tears, not performed ones, because they had genuinely believed they had lost someone who could not be replaced. Alive. On a dying civilian aircraft. Working a cyber attack with her hands and her knowledge, trying to save 312 people who had no idea who was sitting at the front of their plane. Garrett keyed back to the main emergency frequency. When he spoke his voice was level again. Professional. Because that was what the moment required, and he understood, better than almost anyone, what that kind of discipline cost. "Wraith, this is Falcon 1. We are with you. Tell us what you need." The approach to Denver International was the most demanding piece of flying Captain Daniel Brooks had done in 23 years of professional aviation. The aircraft was heavy on the controls, much heavier than anything he had ever managed in a real flight, though he had practiced manual override scenarios in simulators. The difference between simulator and reality, he was discovering, was the weight of 312 lives sitting behind him. Sarah stood at the back of the cockpit, calling out numbers and observations in a quiet, steady voice. Airspeed. Pitch angle. Hydraulic pressure readings on the secondary system. The estimated flare point for a manual approach at their current weight and configuration. She was not flying the aircraft. That was Brooks. But she was giving him everything she could see that he could not. "Flaps are going to give you maybe 60% of their normal effectiveness," she said. "Plan your approach speed accordingly. Come in faster than the book says. Do not chase the ideal numbers, you are not in an ideal aircraft right now. Understood. Your landing gear should extend but expect it to be slow. Give it time. Do not pump it. Understood. When you flare, it is going to want to drift left. The damaged elevator has a slight bias. Compensate early, not late." Brooks absorbed everything. He had been a pilot for a long time and he knew the difference between advice and noise. Everything she was giving him was advice. Outside, the 2 F-22s had positioned themselves, one off each wing, close enough to observe, far enough to give the 777 room. They had cleared the airspace around Denver International entirely. Emergency services lined the runway in a configuration that Grace Kim, looking out from the cabin, described to the passengers as standard procedure while privately thinking she had never seen that many vehicles in her entire career. The passengers had been in brace position for 11 minutes. Grace and David had moved through the cabin one final time. They had been calm. They had been professional. They had told people what to do and the people, to their enormous credit, had done it. The crying had mostly stopped. The screaming had stopped. People were afraid but they were still. There is a kind of courage that ordinary people discover in extraordinary moments, and the passengers of that aircraft found it that morning. In 32A, Patrick Hess had his eyes closed and his hands folded. In 32C, Jordan Webb had taken the hand of the older woman in the seat across the aisle who he had never met before, and she had taken his back. The aircraft crossed the runway threshold at 172 knots, faster than normal, as instructed. Brooks held the nose up with both hands, feeling every movement through the controls. The drift came. Left, exactly as she had said. He corrected. Right rudder, right aileron input, holding the correction against the aircraft's preference to go the other way. The wheels hit the runway hard, a single massive jolt that ran through every seat on the aircraft and caused several overhead bins to spring open again, and then the aircraft was down, decelerating, the runway racing past outside the windows. Brooks worked the brakes carefully. The nose wheel came down. The aircraft tracked straight. It slowed. It slowed more. And then it stopped. For 3 full seconds there was total silence in the cockpit. Then First Officer Patel put both hands flat on the instrument panel and exhaled a long, slow breath. Brooks turned to look at Sarah Cole. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. "I don't know who you are," he said finally. "I don't know what your real name is. But you saved everyone on this aircraft." Sarah looked at him. Her expression had not changed significantly from what it had been in seat 32B 7 hours ago, calm, measured, complete. "You flew it, Captain. I just gave you better numbers." She picked up her black bag from where she had stowed it against the cockpit wall and moved toward the door. The evacuation of Flight 1147 took 9 minutes and was completed without a single injury. 312 passengers descended the emergency slides onto the tarmac of Denver International Airport in the bright morning sunlight. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft. Medical teams moved through the crowd. Everyone was checked, assessed, directed. Nobody knew what to look for when it came to Sarah Cole. She walked down the slide, crossed the tarmac, and moved through the initial processing without speaking any more than was necessary. She gave her manifest name to the official who asked. She accepted a foil emergency blanket that she did not need. She kept moving. At the edge of the emergency perimeter, 2 figures were waiting. They were still in flight suits. They had landed their F-22s at Denver International and walked directly to this point. Major Tom Garrett and Captain Rosa Diaz stood side by side with expressions that were difficult to read, something between professional respect and something much more personal than that. Sarah stopped in front of them. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. He had known, in an abstract way, that people came back from things they were not supposed to come back from. He had heard the stories. He had never expected to be standing in front of one of those stories on a tarmac in Denver on a Tuesday morning. "The briefing said you were gone," he said. "We were told there was no chance. We were told the operation." "I know what you were told," she said. "Are you?" He stopped. Started again. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Are you okay?" It was possibly the most unmilitary question he had ever asked anyone in a professional context. And he asked it anyway. Sarah considered it with the same careful attention she gave to everything. "There is a network that has been inside commercial aviation systems for at least 8 months, she said. Today was a test. They were measuring response times, testing emergency protocols, identifying vulnerabilities in the way authorities react. They will use what they learned today for something larger." She paused. "I need secure communication lines to 4 separate agencies within the next 2 hours. And I need the information in this bag analyzed by people with the right clearances." Garrett nodded slowly. "That's not what I asked." "I know." A moment passed between them, the particular silence of people who have shared the language of extreme risk and understand things about each other that do not need to be said aloud. "We can get you whatever you need," Diaz said quietly. Sarah nodded. She looked back once at the aircraft sitting on the runway, still and enormous in the morning light, surrounded by vehicles and personnel, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. 312 people were standing on that tarmac because of what had happened in that cockpit. She turned away and walked toward the terminal. She did not look back again. The investigation into what happened to Flight 1147 took 4 months. The findings, most of which remain classified, confirmed what Sarah had identified in the cockpit. A sophisticated intrusion into the aircraft's digital systems, an attack designed with detailed knowledge of exactly how those systems were built and exactly where they were vulnerable. The kind of knowledge that does not come from outside research. The kind of knowledge that comes from the inside. The digital signature of the intrusion matched a methodology that existed in only a handful of classified documents. Documents that related to penetration testing work done by military cyber teams, work designed to identify vulnerabilities before enemies could exploit them. Somewhere along the way, that work had gone somewhere it was never supposed to go. The person responsible was identified 6 weeks later. The details of that identification and what followed are not available in any public document. What was made public, in a brief and carefully worded statement, was that the aviation security protocols for commercial aircraft in the United States had been comprehensively reviewed and updated in the months following the incident. Captain Daniel Brooks received a commendation that mentioned his airmanship and his crew's professionalism. First Officer Maya Patel received the same. Both of them, when asked by journalists about the mysterious passenger who had assisted in the cockpit, said the same thing. There was a passenger with some aviation background who was helpful during the emergency. We are grateful for the assistance. That was all they said. That was what they had been asked to say. Flight attendant Grace Kim, when asked the same question, paused for just a moment before answering. Sometimes you make a call in an emergency and you don't fully know why you make it, she said. You just know it's right. I'm glad I made that call. Patrick Hess, the businessman from 32A, gave one interview to a local news station. He said he had been sitting next to a quiet woman who had barely spoken the entire flight. She was just the quietest passenger I have ever seen, he said. I couldn't figure her out at all. And then when everything went wrong she was the calmest person on that aircraft. He shook his head slightly. I never even found out her name. Jordan Webb posted about it online. He wrote that in the middle of the worst 40 minutes of his life, a stranger had grabbed his hand and he had held on. He did not mention the woman in 32B. She had already been gone by the time he looked for her on the tarmac. Somewhere in the country, in a city that does not need to be named, in an apartment that does not appear in any record connected to any name that means anything, a woman with dark hair sits in a chair near a window in the early evening light. She is reading. The apartment is quiet. There is a cup of tea on the table beside her, half finished. She looks, to anyone who might pass by on the street below and glance up, completely unremarkable. That is exactly the point. She has a new identity now. New documents. New city. New name on a new manifest the next time she boards an aircraft and sits quietly and folds her hands and says nothing to anyone for the entire flight. The work is not finished. It is never finished. But 312 people went home to their families on a Tuesday morning in October. And in the quiet moments, the moments between the work and the next assignment and the constant low-level operational awareness that never fully switches off, she allows herself to think about that. Just that. It is enough.